Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and I just finished playing in a tournament this last weekend. Of course, when you listen to this, it may be a couple of years ago, but anyway, it was this past weekend, being the third weekend in August of 2010. For those of you who are coming to this later, and it was an okay tournament. So I had a chance to tie for first with some other GMs, not meaning me, but other than my opponent. So in the last round, if I beat Feingold, I would have tied for first. Of course, that's a tall order, but I was doing fine and should have drawn the game. But we'll come to that in a few weeks' time. So we'll start off with my first round game. So I had black against an expert, Zach Kasiorek, or Kasiurek. I apologize if I'm saying his name incorrectly. And well, it's an interesting game. It's short, but I think reasonably well played on my part, and a thematic game too, I would say. All right, so let's take a look. So e4, e6. So I'm not a real French player, but one of these openings where if you've suffered against it enough over the years, you think, well, if you can't beat him, join him. So actually, my results against the French haven't been that bad, but I thought I would see how the other half lives. So I've been experimenting with this a little bit lately. So it's certainly not my main opening. Whether it will be or not, I don't know. I mean, it's maybe an acquired taste, but it's been interesting to play and kind of fun trying the black side of this every once in a while. Okay, so d4, d5, e5, c5, c3, queen b6. And the idea of this move order, by the way, so for those of you who play knight c6, just sort of automatically, is that there's the, knight f3, queen b6 transposes to the standard position. But there's also this interesting Kuprichik variation with bishop to e3. So white tries to shore up the center in this way. So if you play queen b6, you cut out that possibility. There's no bishop to e3 here. Maybe there's some downside of this, but I haven't seen it. So I think queen to b6 is maybe just a more accurate move order, at least unless you think bishop to e3 is bad, and then maybe you should play knight to c6 as a as a sort of trap. Another idea to playing queen b6, by the way, is that you could sometimes consider the move or the plan bishop to d7 followed by bishop to b5, trying to swap off your traditional bad light squared bishop. But okay, my opponent played knight f3 and knight c6, and here we are in the main line. Now, my opponent played a3, which is, of course, also the main move. And but it's also worth just mentioning, I suppose, that bishop to e2 and bishop to d3 are both important alternatives. The point of a3 is that white is hoping to just clamp down on the queen side with b4 and put an end forever to black's queen side ambitions. Now, here there are several important moves. The most common move here is c4, but c4 just strikes me as the sort of move that I'd almost rather quit chess than play. I suppose that's what shows I'm not a real French player. So I guess a real French player would just feel snug as a bug in a rug with c4. Everything's nice and locked up, and you have maximum trench warfare, and the game just is excuse me, can be very, very plugged up. So this is not really my taste in chess. Pardon me. So I played knight h6. So this is much more an open player's kind of move. So black is going for active play. He's not going to lock the board up. Now, if bishop takes h6, black is very happy to play queen takes b2. So that's not really an issue. And it's not clear that black would care about bishop h6. Anyway, black gets the bishop here. We'll play things like bishop to g7 and f6 and break open the center. So that's not really such a serious threat. So after knight to h6, my opponent carried out the standard positional threat with b4. Okay, and this is all known. So that's what c4 is, of course, designed to prevent. But this is okay. So I played c takes d4, c takes d4. Bishop takes h6 can be played here, by the way. So this is all right here. So takes, and bishop to d7 and rook c8, and eventually bishop g7 and f6 will occur, or at least very commonly. Okay, so after c takes d4, knight f5. All right, all well-known stuff. And here, white has an important choice between bishop to b2, which is what my opponent played, and bishop to e3. Okay, so the bishop on e3 is well, the advantage of that is it avoids a certain tactical trick that black has that's very useful. On the other hand, it doesn't support it doesn't take part in the fight for the e5 square. So black can play f6 and break up white's center, whereas the bishop on b2 does give indirect support to e5 as well. Okay, well, after bishop to b2, I played bishop to d7, all still very well known. And here my opponent played correctly with g4, but unfortunately for him, he didn't follow it up very well. So g4 is an extremely committal move, but it's one that he has to play. I mean, he wants to play knight to c3, but he's got to watch out for this pawn just dropping off the board, since the bishop on b2 will no longer protect it. So g4 takes care of that. Here black can play knight h6, but knight f to e7 is the main move, and I think it scores better too. And now white plays knight to c3. Okay, so all of this is standard. And here black could play h5. This is a real move too, fighting for the f5 square, because white can't play h3 on account of the pin on the h-file. So h5 is certainly not bad, but the main move here, and this is, as I said, taking advantage of the bishop being on b2 rather than on e3, and it's knight to a5. Okay, so if b takes a5, queen takes b2 is fantastic for black. So white plays here. Well, actually, white has several moves here. Knight to d2 is, I think, the most common move nowadays, and it leads to some extremely sharp play. So the main line goes like this: rook c8, I believe rook c1, knight to g6, h4, bishop to e7, g5, castles, queen g4. And it looks like white is just going to destroy black here, just going to shove his pawns up the board. But in fact, it's very, very complicated. So bishop takes b4, a b4, queen b4. And now white can either play bishop to a1 or delay the same combination by a move with bishop to a1. So I'll just show you. Rook to b1, rook takes, bishop takes, queen takes, rook h3, queen c7, bishop to d3. And again, the play is very, very complex. Knight to e7, and then white has tried both h5 and queen f4 here. And materially, black is doing fine, but he has to be very careful that white's kingside initiative doesn't just blow him away. So I mentioned a little move order funny business here. So in this position, instead of rook to b1, white can play bishop to a1, but this is just a way of gaining an extra move on the clock, that's all. Queen a3, rook to b1, takes, and we're in the exact same thing. Just took one move longer to get to the same position. Okay, so going back here, that's knight to d2. Knight to d2 for white. Queen c2 is also an important move, and here the bishop's protected, so we've got to do something about the knight. And the point is that white forces the knight to c4 before there's a rook on c4. But still, after takes and takes, black is going to get some counterplay along this diagonal. So it's still a reasonable position for both sides. All right, well, in the game, my opponent played knight to a4. And this looks quite reasonable at first glance. So he's kind of pushing me around here. Clearly, I don't want to play bishop takes a4 and then retreat the knight. I mean, I guess I could, but it's pretty uninspiring. So, but queen to c6 is what I played, and this is a good move. He played b5, queen c7, rook c1. So it looks like white is just driving black back. All my little tactics are gone. My pieces are huddled on the back two ranks, other than my knight, which is on the edge of the board and is going to walk into a pin now. So I play knight to c4. Now, here, it's funny. Again, my position may look a little bit strange at first, but actually it's quite all right. And white's queen side is a bit overextended, so I'm threatening to take the pawn on b5. I'm also threatening queen a5 check, and followed by taking. And this pawn is weak too. This guy is overextended. I might play h5, and go for the f5 square. So really, white I think has problems here. I don't think this is such a great position for white. In the game, he was really concerned about this pawn on b5. So understandably, he played bishop takes c4, d takes c4, and then knight to c5, which is kind of clever. So the idea is that if I take on b5, he plays a4, and then he regains the c pawn. So you might want to think here and come up with a plan for black. What should I do in this position? And it is kind of funny. I mean, white seems to have all this extra space, but and I have no development, or very unimpressive looking development. But I think black is actually better. Well, I'm sure black is better, and it's just a question of how much. Okay, well, I played bishop takes b5. He played a4, and I played bishop to c6. And the traditional so-called bad bishop, this French bishop on c6, is in fact a powerhouse. I mean, it's the diagonal thanks to g2, g4. Well, it would have been a good diagonal anyway, but now it's a fantastic diagonal. But still, the question is, well, okay, what do I have after rook takes c4? So I have a beautiful bishop. I have the lovely d5 square. The problem is that that I have at least three pieces that would like to use d5. My knight, my bishop, and even the queen would be pretty happy on d5. But meanwhile, I have to develop, it seems. My king is in the center. My bishop on f8 is still, got the still snoozing merrily away. h5 is always something I could consider. So what should black do here? So this is, I think, an important moment in the game. You might want to try to figure out what black to move should do. Well, my thought here was very much, how can I use this diagonal? This diagonal just looks great. I looked at things like, okay, knight to d5, maybe playing knight to f4, but I had really wanted to put my queen on d5, or I shouldn't say that. I wanted to put my queen on the long diagonal. So, for instance, b6 was a move that I thought about. So I really wanted to use this diagonal. But the problem with this is that knight to e4, queen b7, knight to d6, well, I just lose the game. But if he doesn't have knight to d6, this is actually really strong. He's probably just losing, except for that one move. So, one thing you can think about is, well, maybe you should play something like knight to g6 first, right? Or h5 and then knight to f5. So I thought about that, but after a while, it dawned on me, well, maybe I should put my queen on d5 instead. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll play queen to d8, and let's say he castles, queen to d5, rook to c3. That's kind of annoying. So the rook can save itself, and it protects the knight on f3. So that was unfortunate. Of course, I'm still in great shape here. I mean, I could play maybe h5 again. I could maybe consider b6 and then queen to e4 to get my queen over to the g3 square. So let's. Well, okay. One problem with this is maybe that's kind of annoying, again with this threat. Although I don't know. Let's even experiment with this, right? So if this, this is just. Well, actually, maybe this is okay for him. Maybe he's surviving here. If I tried something like knight to g6 or knight to f5 to go to h4, then at worst maybe he can sack the exchange. So maybe I could play bishop takes a8. I'm not sure. Maybe just rook g1 and then rook to g3, and he's all right. He probably gets there in time to save the day. Now, of course, I could play rook to c8. I don't have to allow all of that. Whoops. Rook to c8. But then I suppose he has knight to b4, so this doesn't work either. So perhaps a better way would be, again, knight to g6 straight away. So this makes more sense. So now we're threatening bishop c5 and then queen to e4. So there's no fork. We don't have to loosen our queenside with b6. And the knight is already ready. In fact, we're threatening knight to h4. So this actually looks very strong. Maybe this is just winning as well. Perhaps he has to beat the retreat with knight to b3 knight h4, or maybe, no, maybe queen to e4 first, so I hit that pawn. And, okay, only on h3, then maybe h5 or knight to h4. So this position looks really, really good for me. Yeah, knight f4. Yeah, knight f4 looks pretty nice. Okay, let's say king h2, h5, maybe here, but this is okay. I almost want to sack the queen. I don't think there's any way to make that work, but it's getting close enough that that could almost work. But okay, even just queen to d5 should give me a big advantage, or probably queen to g6 or h7 is better. Yeah, this should be great. So okay, what black has lots and lots of really promising looking options. And maybe there's something even better in all of that. But anyway, queen d8, castles queen d5 looks really close. So after thinking a while here, let me see, how long did I think about this? I'm not sure if I thought about it here. I think it was a few moves before that I found it. Yeah, so it took me about, I think I thought for about 7 minutes in this position after knight to c5. And this is where I had found the idea. So after bishop b5, a4, bishop c6, rook c4, I played queen to a5 check. And that's the solution to all of the little dilemmas that I face. It's not a solution for white, though. White is just cooked at this point. He probably has to play something like king f1 or king to e2. And then, well, among other things, he's got problems on this diagonal. So if he goes here, here, you know, maybe there's something like b6 and queen a6. And that could be pretty unpleasant for him, if nothing else. And just the fact that his king is stuck, not being able to castle, is going to be unpleasant. But still, that's what he needed to do, because all of the interpositions are bad. If he blocks with the queen, well, I just trade, and he either loses the knight or he loses the rook. Okay, so that doesn't work. If he plays rook c3, I have knight to d5. Game over. If he blocks with the knight, I have bishop takes h1. Game over. So he played bishop to c3, nothing else. And then I played queen to d8. And here he just fell into it, proverbial hook, line, and sinker, but what can he do? Probably, you know, maybe the best thing is to just retreat the bishop again back to b2. And, you know, of course, I've got a great initiative. I mean, I can play, again, queen to d5, and then h5 or knight g6, and you know the drill at this point, with just a great positional advantage, probably a winning positional advantage. But okay, at least he's still kicking. But in the game, he castled, and that was just a big oops. So I played queen to d5, and now the rook doesn't have the c3 square. So that was the point of that neat little tactic. And the only way that he can save all of his material, of course, is with knight to d2. But this has a wee problem, queen to g2, or queen to h1 mate. So that was the first round, and yeah, he resigned here. And it was a nice success, and a very thematic game. Again, my opponent played g4, which is, again, absolutely the right move, but it's only the right move, or it's a dangerous move. I mean, it's the kind of move that you should only play. Well, you have to take it very seriously. It's obviously potentially creating huge weaknesses. Even if I don't open that long diagonal, it still weakens the f5 square. Well, after h5, it weakens f4 especially, and yeah, those are problems already. And again, if the diagonal gets opened, well, then it's Christmas for black. Okay, so that was round one. By the way, I just wanted to look at this game from the standpoint of beginner's book. So it's just kind of amusing to think of all the things we did that the textbooks would reject. Right. So here we are. We're moving lots of pawns in the opening, and not only center pawns. The first piece that comes out is the queen. Okay, then he pushes a rook pawn. I develop a knight to the edge of the board. Okay, he moves another pawn. Take and take. Okay, again I move a piece more than once in the opening. Okay, then he makes still another pawn move, and a weakening pawn move. But as I said, it's the right move. Okay, and now I bring my knight to a square where it blocks my bishop in. Okay, he develops, no problem there. All right, and now I move my knight to the edge of the board. He does the same thing. Okay, now I make a queen move. More pawn moves, more queen moves. All right, so it's just funny. All of these violations of textbook orthodoxy. And but many of these moves were entirely right. Okay, and so now, of course, I don't develop. I undevelop. And another queen move, and that ends the game. And of course, neither player castled until the very last move for him, and it was a blunder. So it's just interesting to note how often and reasonable it is to violate textbook rules. So it's more a lesson for the lower rated players in the audience, or for less experienced players. But you should know too that the textbooks weren't completely undermined in this game. I mean, you could see G4. I mean, it's the kind of move where if you don't do everything right, really bad things can happen, and that is what in fact occurred. I mean, if you put his pawn back on G2, I'm a little bit better here, but nothing serious. So that's, if he could have undone that, then he would have quite a reasonable position. And you can see all of these pawn pushes created all of these holes. So if there was if the pawn were back on E4, or you have a pawn on C4, pawn on G2, if you could take back any of these things, then the position is quite reasonable for white, but you can't. So be careful about such moves, but don't reject them. If it's the right move, play it. Okay, well, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next week with my round 2 game. Bye-bye.